There is a spectrum of opinion when it comes to what media and what content should be consumed by Christians. Now, I'm going to put this spectrum up. On the left side of the spectrum are the Christians who say, it's all good. All social media is good. They use social media regularly. They openly consume all sorts of non-Christian content. These are the people who would post about the latest Bachelor gossip on their Twitter or Instagram account. And before I go any further, just to clarify, the left and the right do not correspond to politics. I didn't put this to make a political point. Okay, so you've got the left side, but then on the right side of the spectrum, you have some Christians who think it's all bad. A lot of them don't have any social media accounts at all. They might not even watch Netflix or even listen to music that isn't Christian music. Sometimes they don't even have smartphones. Now think about this. Which group, left or right, do you think is bigger? I haven't done a specific study on this, but just thinking about the people that I know, and you can think about the people that you know, it's probably that you know less people who would be on the right side of the spectrum. And if you're in the group which is on the left side of the spectrum, which statistically you probably are, and you meet people from the right side, it's easy to think, what is wrong with you? Why are you so legalistic? You're being like the Pharisees in the Bible, who made those strict rules that went way beyond what the Bible said. Maybe you'd even go further and say, you are the reason that people think Christians are so weird. You lump them in, with that group of the stereotypical, Baptist who's against dancing and drinking. And I think that there is something to this reaction because a lot of us grew up in very legalistic churches that did add rules and regulations that went beyond and sometimes were even in contradiction to what Jesus said about how we should treat other people. My brother told me about a pastor who said that in the church he grew up in, they said you weren't a Christian if you smoked cigarettes. So there's clearly something about this danger. But I think that there's more to this whole debate than what we just see on the surface. Like, it would be great if we could just say, okay, Christians should be on social media platforms as a blanket statement, or they shouldn't. Or even Christians can watch this type of content, but not this type. But it's not that clear cut. And there's, I think, a bigger and more important dynamic going on under the surface that we need to wrestle through as a community, because things like this can really divide us. And Christians more than ever now need to be united. So we're going to turn to the Bible to find some clarity. Obviously, the Bible, it's an old book, so it doesn't address social media directly, but there is a parallel situation that I think we can draw principles from that let us sort through all of the stuff that we're talking about. The Apostle Paul, maybe you know him as St. Paul if you're from a Catholic background. He wrote a lot of different letters to different churches. One of them was to a group of house churches that was meeting in Rome. So a tiny bit of backstory, in the year AD 49, there was a big riot in Rome and the Jewish people were exiled. And so while they're gone, these new Christian churches started up. They consisted mainly of non-Jewish people. But then once the guy who sent them all away, once he died, the emperor, the Jews were allowed to come back. And many of them joined these Christian churches that were majority non-Jewish people. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Jewish customs, but they had a lot of very specific rules about how to conduct life, specifically around the area of what foods you could or couldn't eat. Some foods to them were clean and others were unclean, which meant you should never eat them. But for the people around them in these same church communities, the non-Jewish people, they didn't have those same convictions. All food to them was clean. And even a lot of the Christian leaders believed that food was now clean for everyone. There was a guy named Peter. He was an early Christian leader. He had a vision where God told him that all food was now clean to eat. So it seems pretty clear cut, right? You've got this community where there's probably some division. You're all sitting at the same dinner table. People are refusing to eat the food that's been put in front of them. It seems like God declared food clean, so this smaller group of people should just acquiesce, right, and get over this. And you can maybe start to see the parallel to our dynamic. You've got this smaller group of Christians who think that social media is bad and shouldn't be used by Christians. Then you've got a much larger group of Christians who say, because of Jesus, we're free to use whatever platform that we want. And so when Paul writes to this community, this is the reality he's speaking into. So what does he say? Who's right? As you guessed, the answer is a little bit more complicated than maybe we would like. Now, I'm going to put this back on the screen. This is what Paul says to the community. He says, accept other believers who are weak in faith and don't argue with them about what they think is right or wrong. For instance, one person believes it's right to eat anything, but another believer with a sensitive conscience will only eat vegetables. Those who feel free to eat anything must not look down on those who don't. And those who don't eat certain foods must not condemn those who do, for God has accepted them. So already we're seeing a different picture than maybe what we expected. I know and am convinced on the authority of the Lord Jesus that no food in and of itself is wrong to eat. So that's what Paul thinks. But if someone believes it is wrong, then for that person, it is wrong. And if another person is distressed by what you eat, you are not acting in love if you go ahead and eat it. Don't let your eating ruin someone for whom Christ died. Remember, all foods are acceptable, but it is wrong to eat something if it makes another person stumble. You may believe that there's nothing wrong with what you're doing, but keep it between yourself and God. So, right there, we see a very different picture than maybe we expected. This is huge. This is a paradigm shift. And Paul, he thought that this was so important that he actually said this almost verbatim in a different letter to a different church that was dealing with a very similar problem. And so, if it's such a big shift, we need to unpack it to see how it applies in our current context. So Paul said, some believers who have sensitive consciences, he calls them weak in faith. They're not eating meat. They'll only eat vegetables. Now you're like, what the heck does food have to do with their conscience? What you have to realize is that the Jewish people did not want to eat meat that had been sacrificed to other gods. And this was the majority of meat that was in circulation in a place like Rome. And this actually goes back to the history of the whole Jewish nation. Eating food sacrificed to other gods was basically equivalent to worshiping those gods. The very act of eating this type of food had such a strong association that for a lot of these people, it was like basically sinning. Just it made them go back to that place of worshiping someone else, and they wanted to avoid the food altogether. And so what does Paul say to them? Does he say, listen, there's only one God. Those other gods, they don't even exist, You need to just get over this. He doesn't say that. He actually puts the emphasis on what the person with the stronger conscience needs to do. He says they need to do whatever they can to keep the weaker person from falling into sinful patterns. Even if the stronger person doesn't have those negative associations with the food, they shouldn't make the weaker person feel guilty for making these associations. And he's using those terms almost ironically, as we'll see. So let's bring this back to Christians and social media. If you ask someone who doesn't have a social media account or any accounts or is using a non-smartphone device, a lot of them will, if they're honest with you, will connect it to some type of sin issue that they struggled with. For many people, social media, it's the gateway to pornography. You click on the explore page of Instagram and you find a good-looking guy or girl, and then they're not wearing much clothing, and then it's only a few clicks or swipes away before you're actually on real pornographic sites. For other people, social media, it's a gateway to all sorts of self-esteem and body image issues. It can be a constant reinforcement of negative thoughts and maybe even encourage people towards self-harm. For other people, social media is a tool of escapism. People continually put off more important things that they need to be doing and zone out on, TikTok or whatever for hours on end, and they neglect their responsibilities or their more important relationships. To the stronger people watching this video, the people who don't feel, those temptations in the same way for whatever reason, do you see that it can be incredibly unloving to tell someone who has opted out, to just have more self-control? Get over this. A friend of mine, he has a non-smartphone device to avoid the temptation of watching pornography. And you can imagine how annoying this is for all of his friends. He can't pull up directions in the car. He can't open emails. He can't see links that you send him. And in every one of these instances, my friend, right? He's the one who made the decision to opt out. And he did this as an act of strength, not actually an act of weakness. He knew that this was going to alienate him from the community. He knew that the other people would judge him. He knew that other people would, probably tell him, stop being such a Pharisee. And yet he made the decision to put God above all of that. Paul's saying, don't pressure someone like that to get back on before they are ready. Don't make them feel bad that it is inconvenience you just a tiny bit more to see their little text bubble as green because they don't have an iPhone anymore. It is much more loving for you as the stronger person to make accommodations for them. Now, clarification. There are people who don't use social media because it's genuinely not interesting to them. So just because someone isn't on a platform does not mean that you can assume it's for some moral reason. I just want to say that for the group of people who are watching this who'd be like, I don't have a moral issue and I'm not on Instagram because I think it's stupid. So I hear you. I understand. But now what we have to see is that Paul, he doesn't just challenge the stronger people to make accommodations for the weaker people. He actually challenges the people in the opposite direction as well. If you're someone who's opted out of social media, for the moral reasons, maybe you've left behind pornography or whatever, and you're thinking, these apps have so much negative potential. There's so much temptation on them. They're terrible. Nobody should be using these because looking at their own experience, that's how they understand it. Paul is saying, listen, you should not extend your own conscience-related issues in the opposite direction to people who don't have the same issues. I've literally sat at the table with another Christian who said, it is a sin for Christians to watch The Bachelor. It was a black and white declaration. Any Christian watching that show is sinning. Now, I don't think it's that clear cut. For some people, maybe it's sinful depending on their motivation for why they're watching. But other people, I don't think it is. And this is where we can impose rules that actually do go beyond what the Bible says. Part of you is maybe thinking, great, so this means we just have to accommodate for all these people who can't control themselves? But this is where I think I'll offend most of you. I would say the majority of people watching this video who would put yourself in the stronger category, probably you need to realize that you're actually in the weaker category. There are many of you who, if you did an audit of your social media usage, you would find that it is consistently pulling you away from God. Whether it's a vehicle for escaping whatever your real responsibilities are, or it's causing you to lust, or maybe it's pumping up your pride from all those likes you get, or making you feel terrible for getting no likes. You may not be in a position of strength as much as you think you are. And probably some of you should make the decision to opt out, at least for a little while. Now, I'm speaking to you from a place of experience because I would put myself in that weaker category. Social media was a massive temptation for me to sin in all sorts of different ways. So much so that I eventually just opted out for a while. I deleted my Instagram for about 4 years, and I only recently reactivated because I was in a much better place spiritually. And even now, I do not use social media like most people use it. I don't sleep with my phone next to me, by the bed. And this makes it so that I can actually talk with my wife before I go to bed or in the morning without simply scrolling, when I wake up or until I fall asleep. Every night I put it downstairs before I get ready to go to bed. And I had to buy an actual physical alarm clock to make this happen. And to keep myself from addictively just staring at screens all day and avoiding, more important work or devotional time with God, I delete the social media apps the moment that I don't need them. I'll check the .church Instagram a few times a day and then immediately delete it after I've read through and responded to the messages. And yes, this means I have to re-download every time I want to use it. If someone says, check out this video I sent you, I have to re-download it. Sometimes that annoys them because they have to wait for it to download. But it makes me use it a lot less. And I've turned my iPad into a non-smart device. I've basically disabled all its notifications so that I can use it to take notes or to read without being tempted down to sink into that social media black hole. There's other people in this community who have taken similar steps so that social media doesn't take over their lives. My friend Danny, he keeps his phone in grayscale mode, so he's not tempted to open every app with that little red notification number. He keeps his phone in a perpetual state of do not disturb, and he sets all those screen time limits. My brother Frankie, he takes daily phone breaks where he keeps the phone physically in a different room. Another friend that I know deleted all the web browsers on his phone. If you are not sure where you are on the weak to strong spectrum, it can be helpful to ask yourselves, why am I using these apps in the first place? Not just should I use these apps or are these apps safe for me, but why am I really using them? Why are you really going on Instagram? Is it to help encourage other people? Is it to try to give yourself validation? Is it to stay connected to people who don't live by you? Or is it to just zone out? If you're honest with yourself, I think you'll get a better gauge of where you're really at. Now, I'm guessing you might have lots of questions or pushback to tons of the things that I've said. I'm hoping that some of this will get clarified in the other video that we're uploading where I have a discussion about this with our guest. But I would encourage you to leave any questions, ask them, put them in the comment section, and we'll try to hit as many of them as possible.